If you guys are on a budget and you're looking to save some money, this right here might represent the best price performance that you can get for a gaming PC in 2021. So what we had here was a PowerEdge server rack that when I was on a recent parts hunt, someone was gonna throw this away and they said, Brian, do you want this thing? I'm gonna chuck it out. And I had a look at it and I said, sure, why not? Let's take a look at what's inside. And it had a 1220 V5 Xeon, and that's a 4-core, 4-threaded CPU. I also noticed the power supply was only 250 watts. However, that would be good enough to support something like a 1050 Ti. So I searched high and low on Facebook Marketplace and good old Gumtree, and I found myself a GTX 1050 Ti for $120. And then from the same person that was gonna give away this server rack, I got 32 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC memory for $80. However, we only have to use half the memory in today's build. And then the last component here is an SSD, a 256 gigabyte SSD that I picked up for a little over $20 in a parts hunt. So all up, we've got a PC here that's coming in under $200, but we're gonna see what price performance we can get. But first things first, we gotta boot this thing up and see if we can even get it to work properly before we go all out and make it a decent gaming PC.
If you've got this annoying Windows needs activation message and you want to get rid of it for cheap, then today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $14 after you use the coupon code BFTYC, you can get yourself a legit single end user Windows 10 license today. Links in the description below.
So the PC is now booting up, but you may notice a problem, and that is that it is very noisy. However, the concept is working, and it looks like it's going to work absolutely fine here after, of course, we give it some tech yes loving, and that's where we're going to clean up all the dirt. But while I'm at it, I might as well replace these fans here with something a bit quieter for my ears. And there's also some other really good news, and that is the graphics card driver. Initially it didn't work, but then after we booted it up and got Windows installed and used the VGA port first, we were then able to get into Windows, install the graphics card driver, and now we are able to play games on this amazing budget gaming PC. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to bring the power back to PowerEdge. And after all that cleaning, we now have a PC of the likes you've probably never seen before that is running absolutely fine. And we've even hacked in that new fan there to give ourselves lower noise and better temps on that CPU cooler. So in terms of tuning though, we don't really have to tune anything on this PC because the BIOS on these are extremely limited in terms of tuning RAM speeds and also in terms of tuning the CPU. But the good thing is that these particular Xeons, they're made for single CPU socket boards, and they generally have higher clock speeds. So I'm hoping we'll get to around, I think these CPUs from memory get to around 3.3 gigahertz all core, which on 4 cores, 4 threads of Skylake IPC, that isn't that bad. So tuning aside, we can technically overclock the graphics card, but since it's on a SATA $1 connector, and also it's a 1050 Ti, there's not a whole lot of extra performance that we're gonna get out of this thing. Though that aside, let's get on to the numbers now and see what this thing can pull off in games. So after gaming on this thing for a few hours, I was left actually impressed and surprised because someone gave away this server rack. They just didn't want it anymore. They thought they couldn't do anything with it, and that's the opportunities that I love to take up and the challenges that I love to get on board here at Tech City and make them into something that someone, especially if you're on a budget and you got a bit of time on your hands, can turn into an epic gaming PC. And that's what we saw here today. And we'll talk about the performance of the games very soon. The problems that we had to overcome here are very important to point out because this could, or problems essentially, could pertain to different models of server racks out there. And this is important when I'm going to make a recommendation here today because what we saw here today, I had to pull out 4 of those little fans because they were way too loud for anyone putting this in the same room that they're going to game in. I then had to use that Dell proprietary connector for the fan and then solder that to a regular fan and change the wiring and then put that on the CPU heatsink for better temps and also lower noise. And speaking of the temperatures, I was very impressed because we're here in summer in Australia and the ambient temperatures are pretty hot, especially where I'm at. And I was actually impressed with the 50 degrees on the GPU and also the 50 degrees on the CPU. So temperatures were really fine. This open air gaming system, it was a server rack, but now it's an open air gaming system. It's running absolutely fine in terms of temperatures. But then after that, I did have to tape down that sensor for the side panel since we cannot use that side panel anymore due to the GPU sticking out. And then the final 2 things that we did was we did use the SATA power to leech off that for the 1050 Ti graphics card, and we had to take out a little metal pole that was sticking out that would otherwise block the GPU, and we had to just take that off completely. Then once we got that all up and running, we had to go into the BIOS and change a few settings. So there was a lot of hurdles to overcome, but the gaming performance was really on point. That 1220 V5 Xeon, that's 4 cores, 4 threads of Skylake IPC, and that ended up handling the games absolutely fine. When it came to CSGO and Fortnite, we were getting over 150 average FPS on both these games at 1080p. And I was actually surprised to see that historically CSGO has always been a lot easier to run than Fortnite, but this time around when I was benchmarking, I was actually getting slightly higher FPS on Fortnite, which was weird. But it does go to show that the developers at Fortnite are working on getting their game to run on pretty much any hardware with better FPS, as opposed to with CSGO, I believe they've made improvements to the engine, well, in the sense that they've made graphical improvements, and that is a bit more strenuous on your hardware. Although I ran CSGO on a blend of high and low settings, I did leave off things like MSAA, which tank performance, as well as shadows, which do tank performance on the CPU side of things. So I was surprised to see that CSGO usually gets a bit higher FPS, but lately the FPS is coming under that of Fortnite, which I was running that at competitive settings with epic view distance and then low with 100% screen res. And then the last title was Cyberpunk 2077, and this thing just does not like budget at all. You really do want to get something like an RTX 3060 Ti or a 6800 from AMD's side if you want to play this game with a good graphical experience and relatively smooth FPS. And even on the higher end systems, you don't get that high FPS. What we saw here today with the 1050 Ti was we booted it in and we were getting around 30 FPS on average, and I couldn't even lock in 1080p on this system. That's how bad this game is in terms of running on hardware. And I thought they had bug patched Cyberpunk 2077, but as soon as I jumped into a load game and my bike that I was riding was just suspended in midair. Like, it was just floating there. So I jumped into a game that was bricked. And I mean, the game was actually running better on when I first played it on first release than it is with these latest patches. But apparently these patches have meant to fix a heap of bugs, so I'm not sure what's going on with Cyberpunk, but there's no DLSS either to lock in. So we're pretty much stuck with 30 FPS at close to 1080p here with low custom presets. So it doesn't really get any worse, but at the same time, I guess you kind of could play this game at 30 FPS. I mean, me personally, I do like at least 60 FPS. And I think if you're a PC gamer and playing fast action paced games, like if I'm playing StarCraft 2, I could probably do that on 30 FPS. But when it comes to like FPS or anything that's first person, I do need that 60 FPS. Though those gaming numbers aside, this now leads us to a straight recommendation with the Dell PowerEdge. And should you think about using a server rack for a gaming PC? And here's where I'm gonna say, if you can at least borrow this, or if you get one for free, especially if you get one for free, someone's chucking one out, then why not? Give it a go. You've got pretty much nothing to lose then. But if you're gonna go out and buy one, and if we look on eBay, some of the prices of these are very cheap. I saw one listing where a guy was selling a heap of them for around $75 each. If you get one of these, you may come into some complications like we saw here today. But if you can mount that graphics card in the PCIe slot, then I'm pretty sure you'll be able to get this thing working like we did here today. Though keep in mind, you will want to use a low powered GPU, something like we used here today, GTX 1050 Ti or maybe a 1650 or an RX 470 will do perfectly. And if you need a 6-pin, then you can leech it off the SATA power and that should be fine. Because we've only got a 250 watt power supply. And so if we put a high powered GPU on, the system will just simply cut out. Now, some of these server racks will support 350 watt models, so you may be able to step it up to maybe a GTX 1066 gigabyte, or maybe an RX 570 instead of a 470. Though keep in mind, you will be limited in your choice of GPUs on a low rated power supply, which in this case, we have to use that power supply because it's pretty much all proprietary. The CPU and motherboard connectors and even the data transfer from the SATA drives to the motherboard itself are all proprietary, even those fan connectors. So we're pretty much stuck with using what Dell has given us, and we can't really change anything. Unless of course you maybe have a week's time on hand and you love soldering. That might be a choice for you. But in this case, going with a server rack mount in 2021, if prices are way too high on all the other components where you are, then these can present a decent choice. And I'm gonna say that because you get the power supply, you get the motherboard, you get the case, you get the cooler, you get the CPU. Sometimes you even get the RAM, throwing in the whole deal. And if it's that cheap, all you have to do is get that GPU, get that SSD or hard drive, smack it in, and you've got yourself now a gaming PC. And that's what it's all about here at Tech Yes City, and that is having fun, trying out new things. So it's kind of like we hit the PC gaming meta jackpot here today, and we came up with something fun that I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button and let us know in the comment section below. Have you tried using a server rack for gaming before, or have you got any other ideas of your own on how to get away in 2021 on a budget and still get some good FPS? Though speaking of price, performance, and FPS, we've got here a question of the day which comes from Zareel, and they ask, I've been seeing some local 3GB GTX 1060s going for 100 to 125 euro. Do y'all think it's worth it to buy it at this price? And to answer that question, I'm gonna say at the moment, I've been seeing a lot of 1063 gigabytes come up for pretty decent prices. And now since the crypto miners don't want these GPUs, and since a lot of the popular titles out there do take advantage of this price performance of this GPU, I can say if you're on a budget and you want to play 1080p games like CSGO, Rainbow Six, and Dota 2, and even Fortnite, this is going to be a great GPU for getting good FPS. And I recently asked people on my Discord what they liked doing with their PCs, whether it's high-end or low-end, and even a lot of the guys with high-end hardware were still playing games like CSGO and Dota 2 and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people who get the real latest and greatest hardware like really high FPS, of course, but they also play the new titles and they don't play them for that long, but then they revert back to all these really popular titles because they have a lot of playability in their multiplayer. So if you want to get into PC gaming and play what a lot of other people are playing, then at 100 euro, the 1063 gigabyte is going to be a pretty good buy. Hope that answers that question. And if you've stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content you want to see at the moment it drops, in your sub boxes. Then don't forget to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.